868. If everything is identical with itself, then it is not different, not opposed, has no ground. Identity 869. 1. Essence is simple immediacy as sublated immediacy. 870. 2. This identity with self is the immediacy of reflection. Remark 1. Abstract identity 871. Thinking that keeps to external reflection fails to attain to a grasp of identity, or of essence, which is the same thing. 872. 2. This identity is, in the first instance, essence itself, not yet a determination of it. 873. Non-identity is absolute insofar as it contains nothing of its other but only itself, that is, it is absolute identity with itself. 874. Identity, therefore, is in its own self absolute non-identity. Remark 2. First original law of thought 875. A equals A is, in the first instance, nothing more than the expression of an empty tautology. 876. By clinging to this unmoved identity which has its opposite in difference, it becomes a one-sidedness which has no truth. 877. Confirmation of the absolute truth of the law of identity is based on experience. For anyone admits that it is self-evident. 878. Identity only in union with difference occurs in every experience. 879. Nothing will be held to be more boring and tedious than conversation which merely reiterates the same thing. 880. Identity, instead of being the unmoved simple, is the passage beyond itself into the dissolution of itself. 881. If the appeal is to be made to what experience shows, then it shows that this identity is nothing. 882. The other expression of the law of identity, it cannot at the same time be A and not A, has a negative form, the law of contradiction. 883. The law of identity itself, and still more the law of contradiction, is not merely of analytic but of synthetic nature. 884. The law of identity which purports to express merely abstract identity in contrast to difference as a truth, is not a law of thought, but rather the opposite of it. B. Difference, A. Absolute difference 885. Difference is the negativity which reflection has within it. 886. 1. This difference is difference in and for itself, absolute difference, the difference of essence. 887. 2. Difference in itself is self-related difference. As such, it is the difference not of an other, but of itself from itself. 888. Identity, having entered into the determination of difference, has not lost itself in it as its other, but preserves itself in it. 889. 3. Difference possesses both moments, identity and difference. Both are thus a positedness, a determinateness. B. Diversity 890. 1. Identity falls apart within itself into diversity. 891. Diversity constitutes the otherness as such of reflection. 892. The moments of difference are identity and difference itself. 893. 2. In diversity, as the indifference of difference, reflection has become, in general, external to itself. 894. Thus the reflection that is implicit and external reflection are the two determinations into which identity and difference posited themselves. 895. This external identity is likeness, and external difference unlikeness. 896. 3. External reflection relates what is diverse to likeness and unlikeness. 897. The diverse are from one side like one another, but from another side are unlike. Insofar as they are like, they are not unlike. 898. This holding apart of likeness and unlikeness is their destruction. 899. The comparer goes from likeness to unlikeness and from this back to likeness, and therefore lets the one vanish in the other. 900. Likeness and unlikeness, as moments of external reflection and as external to themselves, vanish together in their likeness. 901. Diversity, whose indifferent sides are just as much simply and solely moments of one negative unity, is opposition. Remark, the law of diversity 902. Diversity, like identity, is expressed in its own law. Each is valid on its own without respect to the other. 903. All things are different, or there are no two things like each other. 904. To say everything is different from everything else is superfluous, but that no two things are completely alike expresses more. 905. This proposition that unlikeness must be predicated of all things surely stands in need of proof. 906. Likeness and unlikeness are different in one and the same thing. This has therefore passed over into opposition. 907. But the tenderness for things, whose only care is that they do not contradict themselves, forgets that the contradiction is not thereby resolved but merely shifted into subjective reflection. See Opposition 908. In opposition, the determinate rejection, difference, finds its completion. It is the unity of identity and difference. 909. Identity and difference are the moments of difference held within itself. They are reflected moments of its unity. 910. Positiveness is likeness and unlikeness. These two reflected into themselves constitute the determinations of opposition. 911. This self-likeness that contains unlikeness is the positive, and the unlikeness that contains likeness is the negative. 912. The positive and the negative are thus the sides of the opposition that have become self-subsistent. 913. Each is only the opposite of the other, the one is not yet positive, the other is not yet negative, but both are negative to one another. 914. The two sides are merely different. Each side is of such a kind that it can be taken equally well as positive as negative. 915. The positive and negative are not only something posited, but their positedness is taken back into each. 916. The positive is the not opposite, the sublated opposition. 917. The negative is not the immediate negative but the negative as a sublated positedness, the negative based positively on itself. 918. The positive and negative are therefore not merely implicitly positive and negative, but explicitly and actually. Remark: opposite magnitudes of arithmetic. 919. The positive and negative as it is employed in arithmetic does not avoid insoluble difficulties and complications. 920. In the first instance, plus a and r are simply opposite magnitudes. 921. A is not merely the simple unity forming the base, but it is the reflection of the opposites into themselves. 922. According to the first aspect, plus y equals 0. 923. The opposites certainly cancel one another in their relation so that the result is 0. 924. The opposites are not only a single indifferent term but two such. 925. Capital, even if its respective determinations of assets and liabilities nullified each other, remains first positive capital. 926. A, when it bears no sign, is meant to be taken as positive. 927. When positive and negative magnitudes are added and subtracted, they are counted as positive or negative on their own account. 928. This becomes more evident in multiplication and division. 929. The negative here is the intrinsically opposite as such, but the positive is an indeterminate, indifferent sign in general. 930. The negation of negation is the positive. See contradiction 931. 1. Difference as such contains its two sides as moments. 932. One is the positive, the other the negative, but the former as the intrinsically positive, the latter as the intrinsically negative. 933. The self-subsistent determination of reflection that contains the opposite determination is contradiction. 934. Difference as such is already implicitly contradiction. 935. The positive makes itself into the relation of a non-being. 936. This is the absolute contradiction of the positive, but it is immediately the absolute contradiction of the negative. 937. The positive is only implicitly this contradiction, whereas the negative is the contradiction posited. 938. The negative is the whole opposition based on itself, absolute difference that is not related to another. 939. 2. Contradiction resolves itself. 940. The result of contradiction is not merely a nullity. 941. The sides of opposition destroy themselves in that they determine themselves as self-identical. 942. The sublating of positiveness is not again a positiveness, but is a uniting with itself, the positive unity with itself. 943. 3. According to this positive side, opposition is not only destroyed but has withdrawn into its ground. 944. Thus essence as ground is a positiveness, something that has become. 945. The resolved contradiction is therefore ground, essence as unity of the positive and negative. Remark 1. Unity of positive and negative. 946. The positive and negative are the same. But it is not an external comparison that should be drawn between them any more than between any other categories. 947. Superficial thinking does not consider the positive and negative as they are in and for themselves. 948. Even a slight experience in reflective thinking shows that when one moves forward, the positive has secretly turned into a negative. 949. But the negative also has a subsistence of its own apart from this relation to the positive. 950. The opposition between positive and negative is chiefly that the former is supposed to be objective and the latter subjective. 951. Error is a positive, but ignorance is either indifferent to truth and error, or a negative that contains a positive direction within it. Remark 2. The law of the excluded middle. 952. The so-called law of the excluded middle. Something is either A or not A. There is no third. 953. This law implies first that everything is an opposite is determined as either positive or negative. 954. The law of the excluded middle is also distinguished from the laws of identity and contradiction considered above. Remark 3. The law of contradiction. 955. Identity, difference and opposition have been put in the form of a law, still more should contradiction, into which they pass as their truth, be enunciated as a law. 956. It is one of the fundamental prejudices of logic that contradiction is not so essential a determination as identity. 957. In the first place, contradiction is usually kept aloof from things, from the sphere of being and of truth generally. 958. As regards the assertion that there is no contradiction, that it does not exist, this statement need not cause us any concern. 959. Internal self-movement proper, instinctive urge in general, is nothing else but the fact that something is the negative of itself. 960. If the contradiction in motion is masked for ordinary thinking, contradiction is immediately represented in the determinations of relationship. 961. Though ordinary thinking everywhere has contradiction for its content, it does not become aware of it, but remains an external reflection which passes from likeness to unlikeness. 962. In the end, the sum total of all realities simply becomes absolute contradiction within itself. 963. Every concrete thing, every notion, is essentially a unity of distinguished and distinguishable moments, which pass over into contradictory moments. Chapter 3, Ground. 964. Essence determines itself as ground. 965. Essence, in determining itself as ground, is determined as the non-determined, as self-sublating, self-identical essence. 966. Essence, in determining itself as ground, proceeds only from itself. 967. Reflection is pure mediation in general, ground is real mediation of essence with itself. 968. Ground is first, absolute ground. Secondly, it is a determinate ground. Thirdly, ground presupposes a condition. Remark. The law of ground. 969. Ground, like the other determinations of reflection, has been expressed in the form of a law. Everything has its sufficient ground. A absolute ground. A. Form and essence. 970. The determination of reflection, insofar as it withdraws into ground, is a first and immediate determinate being in general. 971. The determinateness of essence as ground is therefore twofold, that of ground and the grounded. 972. This mediation of the ground is therefore the unity of the pure and the determining reflection. 973. The determinations of reflection ought to be self-subsistent, but their self-subsistence is their dissolution. 974. To form belongs in general everything determinate. 975. Form is the completed whole of reflection. 976. The question cannot be asked, how form is added to essence, for it is essence's own immanent reflection. 977. Essence is the indeterminate for which form is an other. As such, it is determined as formless identity. It is matter. B. Form and matter. 978. Matter is the differenceless identity which is essence, the other form, the real basis or substrate of form. 979. 1. If abstraction is made from every determination, from all form of anything, what is left over is indeterminate matter. 980. Matter must therefore be formed, and form must therefore materialize itself. 981. 2. Hence form determines matter, and matter is determined by form. 982. Form and matter presuppose one another. 983. Form as self-subsistent is, besides, the self-sublating contradiction. 984. Matter is also not determined, since form sublates its own self-subsistence. But matter is self-subsistent only as against form. 985. This, which appears as activity of form, is also no less a movement belonging to matter itself. 986. The activity of form and the movement of matter are the same, save that the former is an activity, whereas the latter is a movement. 987. Form, insofar as it presupposes a matter as its other, is finite. It is not ground but only the active principle. 988. The unity of form and matter, which is formed matter, but which is at the same time indifferent to form and matter, these being sublated and unessential determinations. It is content. See Form and Content. 989. What was previously the self-identical comes under the dominance of form and is once more one of its determinations. 990. The content is, first, a form and a matter which belong to it and are essential. It is their unity. 991. The content is, secondly, the identical element in form and matter, so that these would be only indifferent external determinations. 992. The content of the ground is the ground that has returned into its unity with itself. 993. The ground has thereby simply converted itself into determinate ground. B. Determinate ground. A. Formal ground. 994. The ground has a determinate content. The determinateness of the content is the substrate for the form. 995. In this content, the determinateness of the ground and the grounded over against one another has at first vanished. 996. The substrate of the determinations which are form and content are themselves one and the same identity. 997. There is nothing in the ground that is not in the grounded, and there is nothing in the grounded that is not in the ground. 998. The ground and the grounded are each the whole form, and their content is one and the same. Remark: Formal method of explanation from tautological grounds. 999. The sciences, especially the physical sciences, are full of tautologies of this kind. 1000. To answer, why is this person going to town? Because there is an attractive force in the town is sanctioned in the sciences, but outside them is counted absurd. 1001. Since the ground is derived from the phenomenon flows smoothly and with a favorable wind from its ground. 1002. They premise as ground what is in fact derived, and then place in the consequence the ground of these supposed grounds. 1003. At the same time here it repeated that we do not know the inner nature of these forces and matters themselves. B. Real ground. 1004. The relation of ground and grounded comes to be an external form imposed on the content. 1005. When we ask for a ground, we demand that the content of the ground be a different determination from that of the phenomenon. 1006. Apart from this content of the grounded now has its own distinctive content and is the unity of a twofold content. 1007. In the real ground relation, what is present is twofold. 1008. The self-identical form of the ground, that the something is essential and on the other hand posited, has vanished. 1009. An external ground brings the content into combination and determines which is ground and which is posited by the ground. formal method of explanation from a ground distinct from that which is grounded. 1010. Gravity, which is the ground for a house standing, is no less also the ground for a stone falling. 1011. Before nature can be the world, a multiplicity of determinations must be externally added to it. 1012. If in one case a determination is present as ground of another, it does not follow that this other is posited in another case. 1013. Because each is a one-sided ground, and none of them exhausts the subject. None is a sufficient ground, that is, the notion. C. The complete ground. 1014. 1. In real ground, ground as content and ground as relation are only substrates. 1015. The resultant ground relation is therefore the complete ground relation. 1016. 2. The ground relation has thus determined itself more precisely in the following manner. 1017. The two somethings are therefore the two distinct relations of the content which have been brought to view. 1018. The ground relation of the determinations of the content in the second is thus mediated by the first implicit relation of the first. 1019. 3. Real ground shows itself to be the self-external reflection of ground. 1020. The total ground relation has determined itself to be conditioning mediation. See condition A, the relatively unconditioned. 1021. 1. Ground is the immediate and the grounded the mediated. 1022. Condition is, therefore, first an immediate manifold something. Secondly, this something is related to another. 1023. 2. Something is not through its condition is not its ground. 1024. 3. The two sides of the whole, condition and ground, are indifferent and unconditioned in relation to each other. B. The absolutely unconditioned. 1025. Each of the two relatively unconditioned sides is reflected into the other. 1026. Condition is an immediate determinate being. Its form has the two moments, positedness and the in itself. 1027. Ground is equally the whole itself. 1028. What is present is simply only one whole of form, but equally only one whole of content. 1029. The two sides of the whole, condition and ground, are therefore one essential unity, equally as content and as form. 1030. It is the fact's own act to condition itself and to oppose itself as ground to its conditions. C. The emergence of the fact into existence. 1031. The absolutely unconditioned is the absolute ground that is identical with its condition. 1032. The other side of this reflective movement is the ground relation as such, determined as form over against content. 1033. When all the conditions of a fact are present, it enters into existence. 1034. This is the tautological movement of the fact to itself, and its mediation by conditions and ground is the vanishing of both. 1035. The truth of grounding is that its reflection into another is its reflection into itself. Section 2. Appearance. 1036. Essence must appear. 1037. Since essence is ground, it gives itself a real determination through its reflection. 1038. Appearance is that which the thing is in itself or its truth. 1039. What appears manifests what is essential, and this is in its appearance. Chapter 1. Existence. 1040. Whatever is, exists. The truth of being is to be, not a first immediate, but essence that has emerged into immediacy. 1041. Existence is the immediacy that has emerged from the sublating of the mediation by which ground and condition are related. 1042. Proof is, in general, mediated cognition. The various kinds of being demand or imply their own kind of mediation. 1043. The proofs of the existence of God adduce a ground for this existence. 1044. The comprehension of God's existence has been declared unprovable and knowledge of it only an immediate consciousness. 1045. Existence, then, is not to be taken here as a predicate or as a determination. 1046. Existence is negative unity and a being within self. It therefore determines itself immediately as an existent and as thing. The thing and its properties 1047. The existent something is thus a thing. 1048. The thing is distinct from its existence just as something can be distinguished from its being. A thing in itself and existence 1049. 1. The thing in itself is the existent as the essential immediate which has resulted from the sublated mediation. 1050. Reflection 2 as determinate being that mediates itself through other, falls outside the thing in itself. 1051. The thing in itself has color only in relation to the eye, smell in relation to the nose, and so on. 1052. 2. Now this other is reflection which, determined as external, is first external to itself and determinate manifoldness. 1053. The thing in itself is therefore identical with external existence. 1054. The thing in itself is self-related essential existence. 1055. 3. This external reflection is a relating of the things in themselves to one another, their reciprocal mediation as others. B. Property 1056. Quality is the immediate determinateness of something, the negative itself through which being is something. 1057. Properties are the determinate relations of the thing to another thing. Property exists only as a mode of relationship between them. 1058. Through its properties the thing becomes cause, and cause is this, that it preserves itself as effect. 1059. The thing in itself is not a substrate devoid of determinations, but is present in its properties as ground. Remark, the thing in itself of Transcendental Idealism 1060. The thing in itself as such is nothing else but the empty abstraction from all determinateness. 1061. For Transcendental Idealism this external reflection is consciousness and falls in me, the subject. 1062. Subjective idealism is contradicted by the consciousness of freedom, according to which I know myself as the universal. 1063. The thing in itself essentially possesses this external reflection within itself and determines itself endowed with properties. C. The reciprocal action of things 1064. The thing in itself essentially exists. The external immediacy belongs to its in itself or to its reflection into self. 1065. These many different things stand in essential reciprocal action their properties. 1066. Things fall only within the continuity which is property. As extremes having a continuing existence apart from this property, they vanish. 1067. Property, the relation of the self-subsistent extremes, is the self-subsistent itself. The things are the unessential. B. The constitution of the thing out of matters 1068. The transition of property into matter is that performed on sensible matter by chemistry when it represents properties of color, etc., as coloring matter, etc. 1069. The necessity of postulating that properties are in truth matters has resulted from properties being the essential element of things. 1070. Though the thing as this thing is a complete determinateness, this determinateness in the element of unessentiality. 1071. Property is not only an external determination but an intrinsic existence. 1072. The thing consists of an unessential combination of self-subsistent matters, indifferent to their relation in the thing. See dissolution of the thing 1073. Matters circulate freely out of or into this thing. The thing itself is absolute porosity without measure or form of its own. 1074. The thing is determined as an external collection of self-subsistent matters. 1075. Existence has reached its completion. The truth of existence is to have its being in self in unessentiality, appearance. Remark, the porosity of matters 1076. The thing is considered to have properties whose subsistence is the thing, but these are regarded as matters whose subsistence is not the thing. 1077. The usual excuse to evade the contradiction of the independent subsistence of a number of matters is the smallness of the parts. 1078. The contradiction is partly subjective, stemming from pictorial thinking, and partly objective, stemming from the object. 1079. Recent expositions in physics show that a certain volume takes up the same amount of steam whether it is empty of air or filled with it. Chapter 2 Appearance 1080. Existence is the immediacy of being to which essence has restored itself again. 1081. Existence as essential existence is appearance. 1082. Something is only appearance, but the reflection by virtue of which it is this, is its own. 1083. The fact is that appearance is the higher truth. 1084. Appearance is accordingly the unity of illusory being and existence. 1085. These determinations as well as their relation remain self-equal in the flux of appearance. This is the law of appearance. 1086. The world of appearance is confronted by the world of essence. 1087. Appearance becomes correlation or essential relation. The law of appearance. 1088. 1. Appearance is the existent mediated by its negation, which constitutes its subsistence. 1089. Appearance has two sides, one which is contingent, unessential, and subject to transition, the other exempt from this flux, the enduring element. 1090. This contradiction sublates itself, and its unity is the law of appearance. 1091. 2. The law is therefore the positive side of the mediation of what appears. 1092. Appearance and law have one and the same content. Law is the reflection of appearance into identity with self. 1093. Law is the substrate of appearance. Appearance is the same content, but has the unessential content of its immediate being. 1094. Law is not beyond appearance but is immediately present in it. The realm of laws is the stable image of the world of existence or appearance. 1095. 3. Law is therefore essential appearance. 1096. That which appearance contains distinct from law, determined itself as a positive or as another content. 1097. This defect is present in law in this way, that the content of law is at first only diverse and so indifferent to itself. B. The world of appearance and the world in itself. 1098. 1. The existent world tranquilly raises itself to a realm of laws. 1099. Law is, in fact, also the other of appearance as such and its negative reflection as into its other. 1100. Since the different sides of law are different in their negative unity, the identity of law is now a posited and real identity. 1101. Law has obtained the moment of the negative form of its sides which was lacking, which previously belonged still to appearance. 1102. The realm of laws contains only the simple, changeless but varied content of the existent world. 1103. This world in and for itself is also called the supersensuous world. 1104. 2. The world in and for itself is the totality of existence. Outside it there is nothing. 1105. Existence becomes appearance. Ground is sublated in existence. It reinstates itself as the return of appearance into itself. 1106. The world in and for itself is the inversion of the manifested world. See dissolution of appearance. 1107. The two worlds are such that what is positive in the world of appearance is negative in the world in and for itself. 1108. It is just in this opposition of the two worlds that their difference has vanished. 1109. The world of appearance and the essential world are each in themselves self-subsistent wholes of existence. 1110. Law is realized. Its inner identity is also determinately present, and conversely the content of law is raised into ideality. 1111. Law is essential relation. There have arisen two totalities of the content in the world of appearance. Chapter 3. The essential relation. 1112. The truth of appearance is the essential relation. 1113. The essential relation is not yet the true third to essence and existence, though it already contains the determinate union of both. 1114. The identity it contains is not yet complete. 1115. The essential relation is therefore immediately the relation of whole and parts. 1116. Secondly, the relation passes over into the relationship in which one side is moment of the other and in it as in its ground. 1117. Thirdly, the inequality still present in this relation now sublates itself and the final relation is that of inner and outer. The relation of whole and parts. 1118. The essential relation contains first, the self-subsistence of immediacy, reflected into itself. 1119. 2. This relation contains the self-subsistence of the sides, and equally their sublatedness, and both simply in one relation. 1120. The whole is the reflected unity which has an independent subsistence of its own, but is equally repelled from it. 1121. The parts likewise are the whole relation. They are immediate as against reflected self-subsistence. 1122. The whole and the parts therefore condition each other, but the relation here is realized. 1123. Since each has its self-subsistence not in itself but in its other, what is present is only a single identity of both sides. 1124. There is nothing in the whole which is not in the parts, and nothing in the parts which is not in the whole. 1125. Although the whole is equal to the parts, it is not equal to them as parts. 1126. The parts are equal to the whole, but because they are in themselves otherness, they are not equal to it as the unity. 1127. The whole and the parts fall indifferently apart, but as thus held apart they destroy themselves. 1128. The truth of the relation consists therefore in the mediation. 1129. The relation of whole and parts has passed over into the relation of force and its expression. Remark. Infinite divisibility. 1130. The antinomy of infinite divisibility consists in the contradiction in the relation of whole and parts and has been resolved. 1131. Matter as whole consists of parts, and in these the whole vanishes. But the part taken by itself is also not part but the whole. B. The relation of force and its expression. 1132. Force is the negative unity into which the contradiction of whole and parts has resolved itself. 1133. In the essential relation, the immediate and the reflected self-subsistence are posited as sublated or as moments. A. The conditionedness of force. 1134. Force appears as externally connected with a thing and impressed on the thing by an alien power. 1135. Instead of magnetic, electrical, etc. forces, magnetic, electrical, etc. matters are assumed and an ether holding everything together. 1136. Force contains immediate existence as moment, a moment which, though it is condition, passes over and sublates itself. 1137. Force is the unity of reflected and immediate subsistence, or of the form unity and external self-subsistence. 1138. Force is at first only an activity in principle and immediate activity. 1139. The activity of force is conditioned by itself as by the other to itself by a force. 1140. Force is a relation in which each side is the same as the other. B. The solicitation of force. 1141. The externality which is present for force is its own presupposing activity, which at first is posited as another force. 1142. This presupposing is reciprocal. 1143. The other force against which it is active is not passive, which would involve the entry of something alien. The impulse solicits it. 1144. The notion of force is simply the identity of positing and presupposing reflection, or of reflected and immediate unity. 1145. One force is determined as soliciting and the other as being solicited. 1146. A force exerts an impulse on another passively receiving the impulse but then passing into activity, so the force expresses itself. C. The infinity of force. 1147. What force expresses is this, that its externality is identical with its inwardness. See relation of outer and inner. 1148. 1. The relation of whole and parts is the immediate relation. 1149. The inner is determined as the form of reflected immediacy or of essence over against the outer as the form of being. 1150. 2. They are in this way the different form determinations which have an identical substrate, not in themselves but in an other. 1151. Something which in the first instance is only an inner, is for that very reason only an outer. Remark. Immediate identity of inner and outer. 1152. The movement of essence is the becoming of the notion. In the relation of inner and outer, the essential moment of this emerges. 1153. The seed is at first only inner plant. Thus God in his immediate notion is not spirit. Immediately, God is only nature. Transition to actuality 1154. 3. The content is the form itself insofar as this determines itself as difference. 1155. Each of the differences of form, the inner and outer, is posited within itself as the totality of itself and its other. 1156. What something is, it is wholly in its externality. Its appearance is the expression or utterance of what it is in itself. 1157. The essential relation, in this identity of appearance with the inner or with essence, has determined itself into actuality. Section 3. Actuality 1158. Actuality is the unity of essence and existence. 1159. This unity of inner and outer is absolute actuality, in the first instance the absolute as such. 1160. Secondly, actuality proper. Actuality, possibility, and necessity constitute the formal moments of the absolute. 1161. Thirdly, the unity of the absolute and its reflection is the absolute relation substance. Chapter 1, the Absolute 1162. We have to exhibit what the absolute is. But this exhibiting is the self-exposition of the absolute and only a display of what it is. The exposition of the absolute 1163. The absolute itself is the absolute unity of both being and essence. 1164. The absolute is to be the absolute form. But conversely, the absolute is the absolute content. 1165. The content has not been raked together from outside, or submerged in the abyss by a reflection alien to that content, but through its inner necessity. 1166. This positive exposition thus arrests the finite before it vanishes and contemplates it as an expression and image of the absolute. 1167. This expository process, though it is an absolute act through its relation to the absolute into which it withdraws. 1168. The exposition of the absolute is, in fact, its own act which begins from itself and arrives at itself. 1169. The absolute is not merely attribute because it is the subject matter of an external reflection and something determined by it. B. The absolute attribute 1170. The absolute denotes the absolute that in its form has returned into itself. 1171. The absolute is attribute because as simple absolute identity it is in the determination of identity. 1172. It is as inner form that reflection determines the absolute into attribute, something still distinct from the externality. See the mode of the absolute 1173. The attribute is first the absolute as in simple identity with itself. Secondly, it is negation. 1174. Mode, the externality of the absolute is not merely this but externality posited as externality. 1175. The absolute as first indifferent identity is only the determinate absolute or attribute because it is the unreflected absolute. 1176. The true meaning of mode is that it is the absolute's own reflective movement, a determining. 1177. The distinction between form and content is simply dissolved in the absolute. 1178. The absolute is only as the absolute manifestation of itself for itself. As such it is actuality. Remark, the philosophy of Spinoza and Leibniz 1179. Corresponding to the notion of the absolute and to the relation of reflection to it, is the notion of substance in Spinozism. 1180. The notions of substance given by Spinoza are the notions of cause of itself, and that substance is that whose essence includes existence. 1181. Spinoza's definition of the attribute, the manner in which intellect comprehends the essence of substance. 1182. Spinoza further determines attribute as infinite and infinite too in the sense of an infinite plurality. 1183. There is lacking the becoming both of identity and of its determinations. 1184. In the Oriental conception of emanation the absolute is the light which illumines itself, only it also emanates. 1185. The relation of the monads to one another falls outside them and is likewise pre-established by another being. 1186. The distinctions do not originate out of this being itself, but are the product of ratiocinative, dogmatic reflection and have not achieved an inner coherence. Chapter 2 Actuality 1187. The Absolute is the unity of inner and outer as initial, implicit unity. 1188. This unity in which existence or immediacy, and the in itself, the ground or the reflected are simply moments, is actuality. 1189. Difference thus belongs at first to external reflection and is not determined as content. 1190. The relation of actuality as against a possibility is necessity. 1191. The reflection of relative necessity into itself yields absolute necessity, which is absolute possibility and actuality. A contingency or formal actuality, possibility and necessity. 1192. 1. Actuality is formal insofar as it is only immediate, unreflected actuality, not the totality of form. 1193. 2. This possibility is actuality reflected into itself. 1194. Because the determination is here the totality of form, this in itself is determined as sublated. 1195. Indifferent diversity passes over into opposition, but opposition is contradiction. Everything is contradictory and therefore impossible. 1196. This merely formal predication of something it is possible is therefore superficial and empty. 1197. The possible, however, contains more than the bare law of identity. 1198. Possibility as form determination posited as sublated possesses a content in general. 1199. This relation is the contradiction that sublates itself. It is also the immediate and thus becomes actuality. 1200. 3. This actuality is not the primary but the reflected actuality, posited as unity of itself and possibility. 1201. Everything possible has therefore in general a being or an existence. 1202. The unity of possibility and actuality is contingency. 1203. The contingent therefore presents two sides, immediate actuality and likewise as groundless. 1204. Secondly, the contingent is the actual as a merely possible or as a positedness. 1205. Actuality in its immediate unity with possibility is only existence and is determined as something groundless. 1206. The absolute unrest of the becoming of these two determinations is contingency. 1207. The necessary is an actual. As such it is something immediate, groundless. B. Relative necessity, or real actuality, possibility and necessity. 1208. 1. The necessity which has resulted is formal because its moments are formal. 1209. Real actuality as such is in the first instance the thing of many properties, the existent world. 1210. Now real actuality likewise has possibility immediately present within it. 1211. 2. Possibility as the in itself of real actuality is itself real possibility, and the in itself as pregnant with content. 1212. The real possibility of something is therefore the existing multiplicity of circumstances which are connected with it. 1213. This existing multiplicity is both possibility and actuality, yet their identity is, at first, only the content. 1214. When all the conditions of something are completely present, it enters into actuality. 1215. In self-sublating real possibility, what is sublated is a duality, for it is itself the duality of actuality and possibility. 1216. 3. The negation of real possibility is thus its identity with self. 1217. What is necessary cannot be otherwise, but what is simply possible can. 1218. Real possibility and necessity are therefore only seemingly different. 1219. Necessity is at the same time relative, for it has its presupposition in the contingent. 1220. The really necessary is therefore any limited actuality. 1221. The unity of necessity and contingency is present in principle. This unity is to be called absolute actuality. See absolute necessity. 1222. Real necessity is determinate necessity. Formal necessity does not as yet possess any content and determinateness. 1223. This determinateness in its first simplicity is actuality. 1224. Because this actuality is posited as being itself the unity of itself and possibility, it is only an empty determination. 1225. Thus real necessity notionally implicitly contains contingency, but contingency also becomes in it. 1226. It is in this very act that this actuality is determined as a negative. 1227. Form in its realization has penetrated all its differences and made itself transparent. 1228. Absolute necessity is the truth into which actuality possibility as such and formal and real necessity withdraw. 1229. Absolute necessity is thus the reflection or form of the absolute, the unity of being and essence. 1230. Absolute necessity is the essence of those free, inherently necessary actualities. Light shy because there is no reflective movement. 1231. The blind transition of necessity is the absolute's own exposition in which, in its alienation, it reveals itself. Chapter 3, The Absolute Relation. 1232. Absolute necessity is not so much the necessary, but necessity being simply and solely as reflection. 1233. The sides of the absolute relation are therefore not attributes but totalities. 1234. This is the relation of substance and accidents, the immediate vanishing and becoming of illusory being within itself. The relation of substantiality. 1235. Absolute necessity is absolute relation because it is not being as such, but being as absolute self-mediation. 1236. This reflective movement is identity as identity of form, the unity of possibility and actuality. 1237. This movement of accidentality is the actuosity of substance as a tranquil coming forth of itself. 1238. Substance is the totality of the whole and embraces accidentality within it, and accidentality is the whole substance itself. 1239. The flux of accidents is the absolute form unity of accidentality, substance as absolute power. 1240. The accidents as such have no power over one another. They are the simply affirmative something. 1241. On account of this immediate identity and presence of substance in the accidents, no real difference is as yet present. 1242. Thus the relation of substantiality passes over into the relation of causality. B. The relation of causality. 1243. Substance is power reflected into itself that posits determinations and distinguishes them from itself. 1244. This relation of causality is, in the first instance, merely this relation of cause and effect. A. Formal causality. 1245. 1. Cause is primary in relation to effect. 1246. 2. Over against this positedness reflected into itself, stands substance as the non-posited original. 1247. Effect contains nothing whatever that cause does not contain. Conversely, cause contains nothing which is not in its effect. 1248. 3. In this identity of cause and effect, the form through which they are distinguished is sublated. B. The determinate relation of causality. 1249. 1. Content is only implicitly related to form, here to causality. 1250. Cause is determinate in respect of its content and so, therefore, equally is effect. 1251. As finite causality, it has a given content and exhausts itself in an external difference in this identical content. 1252. It is the same fact which presents itself once as cause and again as effect. 1253. It is tautology to determine a phenomenon as effect and then ascend to its cause. It is a repetition of one and the same content. 1254. The cause has of course a further content. Only this further content is a contingent accessory which does not concern the cause. 1255. The change of form suffered by the basic fact in the passage through intermediate terms conceals the identity which it retains. 1256. In physico-organic and spiritual life, what is called cause certainly reveals itself as having a different content from the effect. 1257. 2. This determinateness of the relationship of causality, that content and form are distinct and indifferent, extends further. 1258. This external content is therefore devoid of any relationship and immediate existence. 1259. This thing is not only substrate but also substance, for it is identical subsistence only as subsistence of the relation. 1260. Rain is the cause of wetness, which is the same water as the rain. 1261. Finite reflection makes it in one respect cause and in another respect effect, unable to hold fast the unity. 1262. The infinite progress from effect to effect is entirely the same as the regress from cause to cause. 1263. 3. We have now to see what has developed through the movement of the determinate causal relation. 1264. Causality therefore presupposes its own self or conditions itself. See Action and Reaction 1265. Causality is a presupposing act. Cause is conditioned. 1266. This cause acts, for it is the negative power over itself. At the same time, it is its own presupposition. 1267. Violence is the manifestation of power, or power as external. 1268. Passive substance therefore only receives its due through the action on it of another power. 1269. Since passive substance is itself converted into cause, the outcome is first, that in it the effect is sublated. 1270. The effect which the previously passive substance sublates within itself is, in fact, precisely this effect of the first cause. 1271. That first cause reappears as cause whereby the action is bent round, returning into itself an infinite reciprocal action. See Reciprocity 1272. Reciprocity contains the vanishing of the immediate substantiality and the coming to be of the cause. 1273. Reciprocity displays itself as a reciprocal causality of presupposed, self-conditioned substances. 1274. Causality has returned to its absolute notion and attained to the notion itself. 1275. In reciprocity, therefore, necessity and causality have vanished. 1276. This is the notion, the realm of subjectivity or of freedom. Volume 2. Subjective Logic, the Doctrine of the Notion, forward 1277. Building a new city is attended with difficulties, yet there is no shortage of materials. But the abundance of materials presents all the more obstacles when the task is to remodel an ancient city. 1278. Truth is, as everyone knows, something given up and long since set aside, but philosophy strives to rise again to that aim. The notion in general 1279. What the nature of the notion is, can no more be stated offhand than can the notion of any other object. 1280. Being and essence are so far the moments of its becoming. 1281. Objective logic which treats of being and essence constitutes the genetic exposition of the notion. 1282. The chief moments of this exposition have been given in detail in the second book of the Objective Logic. 1283. Substance is the absolute, actuality as the simple identity of possibility and actuality. 1284. 1. The movement of substance is, in the first instance, the in itself. 1285. 2. The other moment is being for self, which means that the power posits itself as self-related negativity. 1286. 3. The notion is the truth of substance, and freedom is the truth of necessity.